We're going to be talking all about the posterior head of the deltoid musculature. The deltoids are primarily composed of three distinct heads. We got the anterior, the lateral, and the posterior. And I just like to really lay the anatomy down for you as well as the functions, because I think it helps in understanding which exercises train them the best. So for starters, the posterior deltoids originate from the spine of the scapula back there, and then it inserts upon the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus, where all of the deltoid heads insert from. And then the main functions of the posterior deltoid is shoulder extension, shoulder abduction, and shoulder external rotation. And therefore, if we really want to get a huge stretch under immense tension, which we know is great for growth, we really want some shoulder adduction, so bringing it across the body. And that's going to come in key later. But anyway, let's just get into the first exercise, the bilateral cable rear delt standing fly. I know that's a mouthful, but this is working primarily on two joints, the scapulae as well as the glenohumeral joint. It's taking the glenohumeral joint through an immense stretch, really putting a stretch on the rear deltoid by getting that full horizontal adduction of the humerus across the body. And then as we really pull the cable, we're getting a great deal of humeral abduction to really shorten the musculature. And additionally, your scapulae is going to be involved by retracting your scapulae, your scapular blades. You're going to be involving the rear delts along with a bunch of other muscles of the back. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first exercise that I have for you guys today is kind of a replacement for almost every rear delt exercise, especially like the classical bent over dumbbell rear delt fly, because that exercise has some very real problems. For example, you are kind of limited in the way that you can actually do the lift because you have to rely on your core and erector spinae stability in order to not like waver your form. And additionally, because of just how dumbbells are, they're just a regular weight. At the bottom range of that motion, you're actually not getting any tension across the musculature, across the rear delt. And we really want constant tension on the rear delt, and especially we want a deep stretch. And here comes in the bilateral cable fly. And you could totally do this unilateral, but today, since the second exercise that we're going to be hitting is going to be a unilateral lift, I decided for the first one to be bilateral just to mix it up. But anyway, let's go to... Oh, all right. Dang. If you guys haven't tried that lift, you have to try it. It is a real game changer. I mean, my rear delts are lit the fuck up, and it's one of those muscle groups that people really struggle to target. So just by my rear delts really feeling it, I suggest that you try it. Now, the only real complaint that I have is that when you're doing it, in order to achieve the peak lengthened or stretched position and really put that tension in that really hypertrophic range for the rear delts, you need a huge degree of humeral adduction. So you need your arm way across your body in order to trigger that stretch in the rear delts. And therefore, you know, when you're doing the cables, you have to cross them over each other, and you have to get your arms like this. And that is such a pain in the neck to do, especially when you're trying to like solidify good form and really use as much strength and power as you possibly can. But honestly, the only silver lining of that is that you have to go deliberately very slow in order for your hands just to not hit each other like that. So it can be a good thing if you're struggling with tempo, but otherwise it is kind of an annoyance. And that's where doing something like a unilateral variation of this exercise can really come in handy. And when you're doing this version, really make sure that you're holding on to something so that you have a peak stability while you're doing it. But like I said,
I just chose to do the bilateral since we're going to be doing a unilateral lift next. But this is just such a game changer because when you're doing any dumbbell variation of a rear delt fly or even a face pull variation with like a rope, you're not getting that humeral adduction. So you're not actually getting a peak stretch. You're not lengthening the rear deltoids in any stretch of the imagination. And it's not even the hardest when you are even close to that full humeral adduction. In those lifts, it's the hardest during the most shortened position, aka when your humerus is in extension behind the body. So that's kind of a real problem because then we're not actually training it in the range of motion that is the most hypertrophic. Anyways, guys, I suggest you try it. Let's get into the next one.
Our second exercise, our second movement of today is going to be the seated machine unilateral cable rear delt fly. It's another mouthful for you. Now, this one is great because you are so much more stable and locked into place. But the real benefit of how it can outshine our first movement is that we're not involving the humeral ulnar joint of the elbow whatsoever. I know it wasn't really involved much. I didn't even talk about it with the first movement. However, in this particular movement, you can really just focus on the humerus because that is the contact point between your arm and the actual pad. So then we can just focus in on the rear delt, take the elbow completely out of it, and away we go. Let's get into it.
So the gym that I'm at right now, unfortunately, does not possess the classical pec deck or rear delt fly machine. It has this kind of goofy one with the pads here, but I think it's still going to work pretty well. And it's at least applying the same principles that I'm trying to get across. We're still getting that humeral adduction in order to achieve a peak stretch. And you're able to do it unilaterally, and it's still a machine. And that's what I really wanted to highlight on this second exercise of today. And that's that this is just another variation according to the same principles, which is really capitalizing on the rear delt functions. That's all you really need when you're looking for like a perfect lift. You need it to be able to take the muscle through its full range of motion, really emphasize the stretch position, and just be very easily loadable and stable. And as long as it's checking all those boxes, and I think that you have yourself a winner. And this one definitely does that. In fact, it's more stable than the first exercise, the bilateral cable rear delt fly. It's much more stable than that. The only issue that I have with a machine variation, and that's where kind of doing both can really be a great thing, is that this is so locked in. That's the problem with machines, is that it's kind of conforming to like the average person, but if you're like 6'7", this machine's going to feel really awkward. Even for me, I'm 6'2", it's still like pretty awkward. And what I'm trying to get at is like, the smaller your frame, you may have an easier time at lifting this just because of how it's built. Now, that's just kind of a knock on machines in general, because machines only have so many adjustments. They're fixed. They're pieces of metal, and they're not like a dumbbell where it's really up to your individualized anatomy for how you're going to be lifting the dumbbells, But with a machine, you're more locked in. So I think it's really important to find a machine that you like. I would definitely prefer the pec deck variation, like the traditional one, but we're doing this because that's what we got. So let's get after it. It's still going to work. So set number one. Oh, dang, that's a gnarly one too. In fact, if you haven't tried that, I suggest you do, because it's almost like I'm feeling a whole new posterior deltoid muscle. And the reason why I say that is because I was purposefully using a cue. I've talked about it before, but it's just scapular and shoulder protraction while you're doing the lift. So the whole time that I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep my shoulder blade, my glenohumeral joint, protracted the whole time. And the reason for that is because by doing that, you're going to be involving the other muscles of the back to a lesser degree, since most of them are primarily involved in shoulder retraction like this. So by keeping it like this the whole time, it's going to shift emphasis from all these muscles, your rhomboids or traps, stuff like that, directly onto your rear delt. So you can see, look, when I'm protracted, I go back, you can kind of see it. It's kind of popping out right here. Versus if I'm back, there's a lot more that's going on. So that can be a helpful form cue if you're struggling to just use your posterior deltoid musculature. And even if you're not, it can be a helpful tip to test out either way. So I really suggest giving both of these exercises a try. They're working the functions of the rear delt perfectly in spades, and they're just great ways to really target them and not have your other muscles of the back take over. And I think that a lot of people need to do a little bit more rear delt training. You've heard that time and time again, but it is true. People say it for a reason. So anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed this one. Have a good one. Bye.